Let us have a quick recap of some of the topics that we have learnt in the previous lesson before moving on to the topics that we are going to learn in this lesson. If you remember, we have learnt the word katori in the previous lesson. And what does katori mean? Katori can be translated as who, that, which, and it is used to combine two sentences. So, it works as a conjunction. So, function of katori is as conjunction. And how do we use katori to join two sentences? Let us see. I have written here two sentences, simple sentences. Vkomnace sidyat studianti. Vkomnate sidyat studianti. The second sentence is studianti uchatsa universitete. The students are sitting in the room or in the hall, and students are studying in the university. So, there are two sentences, and if you use katori to join these two sentences, how the sentence would look like? Vkomnace sidyat studianti, and then put a comma, and then katorie uchatsa universitete. As you can see, katori refers to the noun or the subject in the second sentence. As we have already explained that katori decline or agree with the noun it refers to in gender, number and case. So, let us find out the number, gender and case of studianti in the second sentence. Studianti is the subject here. So, this is in the nominative case. Studianti, as you can see, it is a plural number, and gender, the plurals do not have any gender. So, katorie is the form that refers to studianti. So, this is also in the nominative case, plural number, and case you already know nominative case. So, vkomnace sidyat studianti katorie uchatsa universitete. So, that is how we use katori. So, to use katori, you have to first find out the noun that katori is going to refer to and the number, gender and case of that particular noun, and we will use the corresponding form of katori to use it as a conjunction. So, that is all about the revision part. We will move on to the topics that we are going to learn today. We have already discussed about the compound future tense in Russian language. So, how do we denote future tense in Russian language? So, the one we have discussed was compound future tense. So, now in this lesson we will discuss about simple future tense. So, how do we denote simple future tense? So, this is our first topic in this lesson. If you remember that compound future tense is denoted by the infinitive form of the verb and the conjugated form of the verb быть, which is to be. So, it is an auxiliary verb. So, auxiliary verb plus infinitive form of the verb is used to denote the compound future tense in Russian language. For example, я буду писать эту книгу завтра. So, I will read this book tomorrow. So, this is how we denote the compound future tense. Now, how do we denote the simple future tense in Russian language? So, we have to use the conjugated form of the perfective aspect. If you remember that we have discussed two aspects of verbs in Russian language. One is imperfective aspect and the other one is perfective aspect. So, when we use the conjugated forms of the perfective aspect, it will denote the future tense. Why? Because perfective aspects do not have any present tense. So, if I say завтра я прочитаю эту книгу, it will mean tomorrow I will read this book. So, now you will say that both these sentences mean the same thing. I will read this book tomorrow, but this can be better understood in Hindi. If we translate both these sentences in Hindi, the first one would be translated as कल मैं यह किताब पढ़ूंगा. कल मैं यह किताब पढ़ूंगा. And if you translate the other sentence, this one, завтра я прочитаю эту книгу, it will be translated as कल मैं यह किताब पढ़ लूँगा. So, here I am saying padhunga and here pad lunga. So, in the second sentence we are telling the audience about the completion of an action. Pad lunga, it denotes the completion. So, that is why we are using the perfective aspect. So, these are the two ways to denote the future tense in Russian language. If you are using imperfective aspect, the infinitive form of the imperfective aspect plus the auxiliary verb which in conjugation, it will denote the compound future tense, and if you are using the perfective aspect in conjugated form, it will denote the simple future tense. So, now the question comes, how do we conjugate the perfective aspect verbs? So, for this we have to look at the various conjugation rules. We have already discussed how do we denote the compound future tense and simple future tense in Russian language. To use simple future tense in Russian language, you need to know how the verbs are conjugated. So, for this thing you have to memorize certain rules of conjugation. So, we will start with the perfective and imperfective aspect pairs. So, as you can see, chitach is imperfective aspect, prachitach is perfective aspect. Peach is imperfective, vipich is the perfective aspect. Pisach imperfective, napisach perfective aspect. Vijich imperfective, uvijich perfective aspect. Ichi, which is to go or to come, is imperfective aspect and paichi is perfective aspect. Igrach, to play, is imperfective aspect and sigrach is perfective aspect. As you can see, the perfective aspects of these verbs have been formed by adding various prefixes. For example, here we have used the prefix pra, here vi, na, u, pa and sa. So, these are the prefixes that we use to form the perfective aspect. So, let me tell you, if the perfective aspect is formed by adding prefixes, then the conjugation will be same as the imperfective aspect. For example, if you know the conjugation of chitach, prachitach will have the same conjugation. For example, ya chitayu, ya prachitayu, on chitayat, on prachitayat. The same way, ya piyu, ya vi piyu, ti piyosh, ti vi piyosh, onana piyot, onana vi piyot, and so on. The same way, pisach, ya pishu, ya na pishu, ti pishish, ti na pishish, and so on. Vijit, ya vishu, ya uvishu, on vijit, on uvijit, and so on. Ichi, ya idu, ya paidu, ti idiosh, ti paidiosh, onana idiot, onana paidiot, ani idut, ani paidut. Igrat, ya igrayu, ya sigrayu, onana igrayet, onana sigrayet, mi igrayem, mi sigrayem, ani igrayut, ani sigrayuts. So, this is how we conjugate the perfective aspect of verbs which are formed by adding prefixes to the imperfective aspect. Now, there are some alternation of consonants that happens when we conjugate some of the verbs. So, these alternations can be categorized broadly in some of the categories. So, here I have written some of them. Let us discuss them one by one. The first alternation happens when we change the consonant s to sh, as we have done in case of pisach. So, how do you conjugate pisach? Ya pishu. So, here we are not using the consonant s, we have changed the consonant to sh. Ya pishu, ti pishish, onana pishit, mi pishim, vi pishite, ani pishut. So, here the alternation happens between s and sh, and this alternation carries forward to all the other forms. The next alternation happens between z and zh. For example, skazat. Skazat is the perfective aspect of gavarit. Gavarit is to speak. So, how do you conjugate skazat? As I have already told you, this z will change into zh. Ya skazhu, ti skashish, onana skashit, mi skashim, vi skashche, ani skashut. So, here we are not using z in the conjugated forms, we are using zh. The next alternation of consonants happens between the consonants k and ch. For example, plakat. Plakat is to cry or to weep. So, how do you conjugate plakat? We will not use k in the conjugated forms, we will use ch. Ya plachu, ti plachish, onana plachet, mi plachim, vi plachiche, ani plachet. So, this is how we conjugate plakat. The next alternation happens between a group of consonants s, k, and it changes to a single consonant sh. So, here a group of cluster of consonant is there in the infinitive form, which is changed to sh in the conjugated forms. For example, iskach. Iskach is to find, to look for. So, how do you conjugate iskach? Ya ishu, ti ishish, onana ishit, mi ishim, vi ishiche, ani ishut. So, this is how we conjugate iskach. So, let me repeat all these alternations once again. The consonant s sometimes changes to sh as in pisach. The consonant z changes to zh as in skazat. The consonant k changes to ch as in plakat. The consonants s and k together changes to sh as in iskach. So, these are few alternations. We will look at some other examples also. There are few other alternations also. So, we have learnt the alternation of consonants in the conjugation of verbs. When the alternation happens in all the forms, all the conjugated forms of the verbs like pisach. So, when you conjugate pisach, this consonant alternation from s to sh happens in all the forms. Ya pishu, ti pishish, onana pishit, mi pishim, vi pishiche, ani pishut. Now, we will discuss the alternations which happen only with the first person singular number, with ya. So, there are few verbs which follow e conjugation and the alternation happens only in the first person singular number, ya. The first alternation happens when the consonant d changes to zh in the first person singular number. For example, if you conjugate this verb vijit, the conjugation we have already discussed, ya viju. So, this the changes to zh, ya viju, but ti vijish. So, from ti onwards, ti vijish, onana vijit, mi vijim, vi vijiche, ani vidyat. So, with rest of the forms we are not following the same alternation. So, the alternation happens only with the first person singular number. The next is ta changes to ch. For example, strechich. Strechich is to meet and it is the perfective form of strichach. So, how do you conjugate strechich? Ya strichu, tiv strechish, onana strechit, mi strechim, viv strechiche, ani strechet. So, here again we are following this alternation, or this alternation happens only with the first person singular number ya, and in rest of the forms we follow the same ta. The next is sa changes to sh. Sprasit. Ya sprashu, ti sprosish, sprosit, sprosim, sprosiche, sprosyat. So, here again with first person singular number ya, this alternation happens, and with rest of the forms it does not. The next is b changes to b and l. So, an additional l is added in the conjugated form with first person singular number. For example, lubit, lubit we have done, it is to love or to like. So, how do you conjugate lubit? Ya lubliu. So, instead of using lubiu, we are adding an additional consonant l. Ya lubliu, ti lubish, onana lubit, mi lubim, vi lubice, ani lubyat. So, again we are using this alternation in the first person singular number. Next is p changes to p and l in the first person singular number. For example, the verb kupit. Kupit is the perfective aspect of pakupat, which means to buy or to purchase. How do you conjugate kupit? Ya kupliu, ti kupish, onana kupit, mi kupim, vi kupice, ani kupyat. So, again we are using this alternation in the first person singular number. Next is v changes to v and l, like gatovit. Gatovit is to prepare. This is the imperfective aspect, and what is the perfective aspect? Prigatovit. So, how will we conjugate gatovit? Ya gatovliu, ti gatovish, onana gatovit, mi gatovim, vi gatovice, ani gatovyat. So, here also we are using this alternation in the first person singular number with ya. The next is when the combination s and th changes to the consonant sh. So, here two consonants are changing into one. For example, the verb chischich. Chischich is to clean. So, how do we conjugate chischich? Ya chishu, ti chischish, onana chischit, mi chischim, vi chischiche, ani chischat. So, here again we are changing this combination of consonants into one. So, this s and th changes to sh. So, this is how we conjugate some of the verbs where alternation of consonants happens. The next topic for this lesson today we have is the dative case of nouns. So, this is another case we have so far we have done nominative, accusative and prepositional cases. Now, we will discuss what is dative case of nouns in Russian language. The first thing we have to do is the interrogative pronouns or the questions to which the dative case of nouns answer. So, kamu and chimu. Kamu represents the animate nouns and chimu inanimate nouns. So, if the question is kamu, then the answer would be animate nouns in the dative case, and if the question is chimu, the answer would be inanimate nouns in the dative case. The dative case of nouns without prepositions denote indirect objects in a sentence. So, we have discussed what are direct objects. Now, we are saying that dative case denotes the indirect objects. So, how do you understand the term indirect objects? Let us look at some of the examples and it will be clear to you how do we define the indirect objects in a sentence. I have written here a couple of sentences. Ya pishu pismo drugu. Ya pishu pismo drugu. I am writing a letter to my friend. I am writing a letter to my friend. And the next sentence is Mi kupili padarak padruge. Mi kupili padarak padruge. We bought a gift for our friend or for a friend. So, here as you can see I have written the interrogative word shto and here I have written kamu. So, if I say ya pishu pismo, so here pismo answers the question shto, and we have discussed that the nouns which answer the question shto are in the accusative case. So, here pismo and padarak, both these nouns answer the question shto. So, these are direct objects, and drugu and padruge, they answer the question kamu, to whom. So, these are the indirect objects. Why they are called indirect objects? Because the subject in both these sentences ya and me are related to these nouns through the direct objects. So, if there is no direct object, there will be no indirect objects. So, that is why they are called indirect objects. They are indirectly related to the subject here. They are also defined as the recipient of the direct objects. For example, ya pishu pismo. So, this pismo, drug is the recipient of pismo. The same way padruga is the recipient of padarak. So, that is how the indirect objects are also defined. Now, there are some verbs which have inherent direct objects in their meaning. So, that is why when we use them in a sentence, we will not write any direct object. For example, let us take savyetavach. Savyetavach is a verb which means to advise. On savyetaval mne ichik vrachu. On savyetaval mne ichik vrachu. He advised me to go to a doctor. So, here savyetavach can also be translated as to give an advice. So, here to give an advice. So, advice is the direct object here which is inherent to the meaning of this verb. So, that is why this advice is not written here and it is inherent to the verb. So, there are a couple of other verbs also where we are not supposed to use the direct objects, it is inherent within the meaning of the verb. So, on savyetaval mini ichik vrachu, he advised me to go to a doctor. So, this was the first use of the dative case of nouns. So, what was the use? This is dative case of nouns are used to denote the indirect objects. So, we will now discuss some other uses as well. The dative case of nouns is also used to denote the logical subjects of some verbs. For example, we have done this verb before, nravitsa pandravitsa, which is the synonym of the verb lubit. Lubit is to like. So, nravitsa pandravitsa, prikhajitsa and prichis. Prikhajitsa, prichis, it means one has to. So, these are few verbs which take the dative case of nouns as their logical subject. Why we are saying logical subject? Because, for example, mne nravitsa etat dom. Mne nravitsa etat dom. So, if you translate this sentence into English, it will be translated as I like this house. As you can see, this ya is in the dative case. So, ya has been changed into mne, which is the dative case form of the personal pronoun ya, but the subject is ya only. So, what happens is when we represent or when we denote the logical subject, which means the ideal subject which is performing the action, it has to be in the form of dative case, like we have done with nravitsa. Этой студентке приходится много работать. So, this is from the second verb we have done, приходится and причис, one has to. So, this student, female student, has to work a lot. So, here again этой студентке is in the form of dative case. So, this student has to work a lot. We have also discussed that a subject has to be in the nominative case. So, that is why I am saying the logical subject. So, here it is not the ideal subject which is to be in the nominative case, but it is the logical subject. So, logically these are the subjects, but they are in the form of dative case. The next use of dative cases with some adverbs and words like holadna, nushna, nilzya, moshna. Holadna is cold, nushna is necessary, nilzya is not allowed or never, moshna is it is allowed. So, nilzya and moshna we have done before. For example, tibye kholadna. So, here tibye kholadna. So, again the logical subject is ti, which is the second person singular number, but ti here is in the form of dative case. That is why we are again saying this is the logical subject of this sentence. Da mniya kholadna. Yes, I am feeling cold. So, are you feeling cold? Yes, I am feeling cold. So, these are the two uses we have discussed so far. The first is with the verbs naravitsa and prikhaditsa to denote the logical subject, and with the adverbs and nushna, nilzya, moshna we use the dative case of nouns as the logical subjects. Now, there are certain prepositions after which we are supposed to use the dative case of nouns. For example, the preposition per, which means movement along the surface, on the surface, ka, movement towards something or someone, blagadarya is thanks to or because of, saglasna is according to or in accordance with. So, these are some of the prepositions after which we use the dative case of nouns. So, now we have learnt the uses of the dative case of nouns. So, what are the uses? The first one is to denote the indirect objects in a sentence, the second one to denote the logical subjects of some of the verbs or adverbs, and the last one with some of the prepositions we are supposed to use the dative case of nouns. So, this is all we have for today's lesson. So, what all we have learned? We have learned the conjugation of verbs, we have learned the simple future tense, and we have learned the uses of the dative case of nouns. So, now we will meet in the next lesson. Till then, spasiba, do svidaniya.